All right, thanks everyone for joining us today. Welcome to the RCR Wireless News post-RCA Spring Expo webinar. We will begin the webinar in 2 minutes just to allow some more people to dial in. Hello, this is Dan Meyer with RCR Wireless News. I want to thank everyone for joining us today for the RCR Wireless News post-RCA Spring Expo webinar. We will begin the webinar in about 1 minute. All right. Again, this is Dan Meyer with RCR Wireless News, Editor-in-Chief at RCR. I want to thank everyone for joining us today for this RCR Wireless News post-RCA Spring Expo webinar. The webinar will take a look at the recent RCA Spring Expo event that was in Orlando. Hopefully have some good insight into the event. Today I am joined by Stephen Berry, who is President and CEO of RCA, the Competitive Carrier Association, and also Rick Virgin, who is CEO of Rural Operator Mosaic Telecom. And also joining us today on the panel is my colleague Martha DeGrasse, who is editor at RCR Wireless News and attended the RCA event this year in Orlando. I know many of you attended the event this year, and probably even more were not able to make the trip, but seeing how the event is one of the largest events on the domestic calendar and specifically targets the smaller wireless operators, or basically anyone outside of the main two, I guess, we thought it would make sense during this webinar to take a look at a few of the important trends that came from this year's event. The plan for this webinar is it's a 1-hour webinar, and the plan is to spend the first half or so discussing the trends that our panel members took away from the event, and then leave the last 20 minutes or so for questions from those of you listening in. For those wanting to ask a question, there is a question tab in the GoToWebinar control panel that you see, and you can go ahead and type your questions in there, and we will try to get to as many questions as possible during the Q&A session of the call. As I mentioned, one of the voices you'll hear on the call today is that of Stephen Berry from RCA. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you.
Thanks. And Steve, why don't you go ahead and maybe just give a few minutes to tell us a bit about yourself for those who don't know, and also maybe a bit about RCA.
Thank you, Dan. I really appreciate it, and thank you and all the other staff at RCR for putting this together. Martha, appreciate having a chance to visit with you again. I know you were at the show, and I'm really glad that you've got one of our outstanding members joining us, the Mosaic Telecom. Rick is also with us today. So this is a great opportunity to talk about our show. The Competitive Carriers Association, RCA, the RCA show, I think was a sort of a watershed show in terms that I think we realized, and everyone realized that the competitive carriers are now sharing many of the same issues, whether you're a small tier 1 or a larger tier 4. The issues are critical to the competitive carrier wireless world, and I think we're seeing RCA, who represents over 100 wireless carriers, 150 to 60 associate members, are trying to build an ecosystem that will help us in our advocacy efforts, educational efforts, and also provide a networking hub for everyone that finds themselves in a similar situation in the competitive world. I think we've had a convergence of the advocacy issues, and I think that was I think we learned that at the show, and also there's a real desire for everyone in the competitive world to find an ecosystem that allows them to get to 4G LTE. And that was one of the main topics, and I think one of the main issues of conversation, no matter which nook and cranny or breakout session you were in. So we think that RCA is the place where the competitive carriers are, and we hope that everyone would join us and join in our advocacy effort. The second slide that you have is the new sort of logo slide for our convention, and I just note that 20 years of RCA competitive carriers will be celebrated at the convention in September. We've got a great venue at the Wynn Las Vegas. Hopefully Rick and all of our carrier members will be there, and we'll have another opportunity to delve in depth on the wireless advocacy issues that are going to drive our livelihoods for the next few years. So thanks, Dan, for giving me an opportunity.
Thanks a lot, Steve. Definitely appreciate it. Also joining us on the call, like Steve had mentioned, is Rick Regine from CEO of Mosaic Telecom. Rick, welcome, and why don't you go ahead and take a minute or so to kind of introduce yourself and maybe a little bit about Mosaic.
Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it very much, and thanks to RCA for having a good conference. Mosaic is located in the northwest part of Wisconsin. We're a very rural provider, probably like a lot of RCA members. Our roots are in the wireline business. We've been doing that for since 1907. Launched recently as an operator in 3G and 4G services. Actually, it was 2009 that we did that late in 2009. We were a partner in a Verizon partnership prior to that, and that just wasn't working out for us for strategic reasons. So we launched services in late 2009 in the AWS band, and then launched LTE services in early 2012 on 700 megahertz lower. So that's pretty much it for us here at Mosaic.
Thanks, Rick. Definitely appreciate it. I'm sure, I think on some of our slides here, I think we'll probably get into some of perhaps some of the challenges or unique perspective you have on launching LTE as a smaller rural carrier. So I definitely appreciate you being on the call today. And last but not least on our call today is RCR editor Martha DeGrasse, who attended the RCA event and will provide some insights as well as we get into the webinar here. So welcome, Martha. Definitely appreciate you taking the time today. All right. So moving along. So our first kind of, I guess, major topic from the event, and it's one of those things that's kind of been impacting the smaller carriers and the competitive carriers for a while now, has been the challenge of interoperability. I know, at least following it from the outside, that spectrum has been a big issue, and especially with the advent of 700 megahertz spectrum. That there's been some issues with band classes and different regulatory issues there about making sure that smaller carriers have access to both devices and also network equipment, and I guess also roaming issues too. So maybe we'll start off with Steve. Maybe get, I guess, your view on kind of this topic and maybe what came from the event that maybe people might want to know about from your perspective on that.
Yes, thanks, Dan. Interoperability. That's sort of a cauldron of several issues. It's for many of the RCA members that own 700 megahertz. They own lower band 700 megahertz. So the 700 megahertz, which we thought was going to be and hope to be the convergence platform for 4G, has not quite worked out like that. And finding out where you stand and what's standard that you're trying to promote has been very difficult, very much shifting sands. And and I don't know if you noticed it, but the landscape changed again this morning when Verizon made an announcement at around 10:30 this morning that they were selling their lower A and B spectrum in 700 megahertz. We know that this whole idea of getting into an ecosystem for competitive carrier, where they can not only be assured of the spectrum they're going to roll their new 4G network out on, has the devices available that you can sell, and also has devices that have roaming potential, roaming partners throughout the United States, has been a critical element, an unknown element that has been arresting the investment in 4G. So many of our members, they have to have the spectrum, but they need the pathway to 4G through devices and the equipment. And I like Dan put on here the golden rule, which we all know is those who have the goal make the rules. And I think you saw again today with Verizon announcing that it's going to sell 700 A and B block, that what we're going to see is they're going to probably condition that in getting their spectrum co-spectrum, which is AWS Spectrum. And again, the pathway changes. And this uncertainty is something we're trying to, not only on the legislative and regulatory front, but also on the business side through our networking opportunities, address so our competitive carriers can have a pathway to rolling out these new innovative services to our customers in regional and rural markets throughout the United States. And I'll stop right there. We can talk about any of those items that you want to, Dan, but as you can see, just by today's developments, we continually live in a fast-paced, ever-changing environment.
Yeah, definitely, and I think that's going to be one of the topics, and one of the other sites coming up too. But yeah, I think today's announcement from Verizon Wireless is definitely an interesting move, and I'm just sure a little bit later on we'll get some more comments from you on that as well, Steve. But I guess on the interoperability front as well, maybe Rick, if you can provide some insight as a carrier yourself who's rolled out LTE at 700 megahertz. Maybe talk a little bit, I guess, about the challenges or any sort of issues you've seen when it comes to interoperability and how that's maybe impacted your business.
Well, I think Steve hit it right on the head. It's a number 2 in what you need to have in order to provide service right behind spectrum.
Yeah.
You can have spectrum, and if you don't have any devices, it doesn't do you any good at all. So interoperability is a big thing, and it's something that small carriers have to be very knowledgeable about before they start launching service, because the devices that you can purchase are really spec'd for the tier 1 carriers. And for AT&T, for instance, uses 3G on 850 and 1900 and LTE on AWS and lower 700. Well, if the spectrum that you've purchased over the last 20 years doesn't match up with that, or you're not offering GSM or UMTS on 1.9, you have problems with your devices working. LTE is the same way. We have access to the Galaxy Note, for instance. It would work on our system. It's lower 700 block. The data part would work on our system, but voice works on 1.9 and 850. We don't have 1.9 and 850. We've got AWS. So we can't buy the phone. We could buy the phone. It just doesn't work on our network. So there's all kinds of pieces to that puzzle that before you pull the trigger on buying a bunch of LTE core and LTE equipment, that you got to make sure that you can get devices that work on the bands that you have and the technology that you have.
Yeah, that makes sense. Have you guys, or this is, I guess, for you or for Steve, have you guys seen some good progress on this front yet, or has it still been kind of a slow go on this? I don't know, Rick, if you've maybe seen some progress along those lines.
Not so much along those lines. We, in our LTE offering, we're able to get the the iPad 3 that has the 700 megahertz and LTE and both AWS and 700. Those work on our network. We just got some in today, and the first things we get back from our techs are they're really excited about it. We've got some fixed broadband devices, but at this point in time, we don't have any handsets that we can sell on 700. So the ecosystem is just developing for that. And of course, we can't use any of the Verizon devices. They don't have the lower 700 block in them. Plus, they work backwards to CDMA, in the earlier frequencies.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And maybe
I
Steve.
think I think what Rick has outlined is the conundrum that every competitive carrier faces, and that is it is controlled by the specs that are set by the duopoly, the AT&T or the Verizon, and they are clearly the ones that direct the OEMs, the manufacturers, to produce the devices. Now, on the 3G world, we have had some progress on getting access to devices because it's at the end of the run of the 3G. And we're having very difficult time on the 4G devices, and it's because, as I testified in the Senate Antitrust Subcommittee a couple weeks ago, if you really know your spectrum policies, you can use spectrum decisions and to create anti-competitive solutions. And I think what we're seeing here is another very well, designed process by the larger carriers to keep the smaller carriers, the competitive carriers, a month, 6 months, a year away from those iconic devices that are competitive in the marketplace today and tomorrow. And Rick has been. I know he's not tooting his horn, so I'll let me toot his horn a little. He's been really innovative and is on the cutting edge of finding these solutions. But I think, Rick, you'd be the first one to say it is not easy at all.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's definitely been one of those issues that seems to continue to plague, and it seems like for 4G at least, that's ongoing. So now, Martha, I don't know. I know you're at the event this year. I don't know if there was any sort of consensus or people maybe you talked to at the event when it came to the issue of interoperability, and maybe, I guess, can you provide some insight, I guess, on the general view from the show when it came to this topic, and how important was it to some of the companies and carriers you talked to at the event?
Yeah, I think it is key to them in being willing to step up and make this investment. I think that maybe there's a sense that we could miss the boat if we don't invest now, but at the same time, there's a fear about investing in 4G only to find out that the devices just aren't going to be there. And I really do think that the carriers are looking for some help from Washington to pressure these OEMs just a little bit to make these devices work across the 700 megahertz spectrum. Yeah,
that's a good point. Good point. Well, again, we'll move on to the next topic here, but this is one of those issues I think that we'll be probably visiting for some time now. I also want to remind those listening in that if you do have some questions for our panelists, that there is a question box there on the GoToWebinar control panel, and you can put those questions in there, and we'll try to get to those towards the end of the call today. Well, our second topic is kind of the 4G deployments. It does sound like over the past couple of months that a number of kind of the smaller operators have dived into or dove into this issue and kind of have rolled out their own 4G networks, sometimes in partnership and sometimes on their own. And since we have Rick here from Mosaic Telecom as a carrier that has rolled out 4G, maybe Rick, if we can get some insight from you into, I guess, some of the challenges there in rolling this out. Obviously, it's a big investment for a smaller carrier, but perhaps something that needs to be done. And so maybe from you, if we can get some insight into, I guess, the thought process and perhaps the business case for going with 4G, and also maybe any issues with Spectrum you might have had as well.
Well, I think from our perspective, our initial thought process, because of interoperability with handsets and so on, that we were looking at it mainly as a data play. Our 3G fixed data deployments that we had didn't scale very well, to be honest with you. We would load up a sector very quick, and had issues with busy times and the normal times that folks get home from school and start using their fixed broadband devices. Had problems in those busy areas, so LTE was really the answer for that, and we have for the last 5 years run a WiMAX, a pre-WiMAX service on our 700 megahertz, and we are still in the process of turning that down and moving the customers onto the LTE network. So our initial focus was to move the customers that we had on 3G and on WiMAX over to LTE, which was a real nice business reason to be able to justify the additional expense. The other thing that I think helped us was when you are late to the game and have just built the network, our network is 100% Ethernet backhaul. So adding additional services or LTE, another layer of service onto our existing 3G network was really a piece of cake. We didn't have to do anything really to our backhaul to upgrade it. So that's been enabled us to roll it out pretty quick. What we of course didn't roll it out until we got customer devices, and we actually went to a manufacturer in China and had those produced in order to be able to provide the service. Because it's like the equipment manufacturers are already there to sell you the equipment, but if you don't have any handsets or any devices for the customer end, it doesn't do any good to have a really nice network but not have both ends of it. So
yeah, that makes sense.
Rick, I don't know if Dan, I don't know if I can ask the question, but that we have a lot of carriers that are looking at what I call spectrum saving measures and utilizing their 700. Rick, was your LTE fully mobile, or was it a fixed wireless nomadic solution, or did you go fully mobile on the LTE capability?
We are fully mobile on it. We have USB dongles that are really some pretty intelligent devices. They work LTE on AWS and 700 meg. Then they go backwards to 3G on AWS and 1.9 and 850, and then they also do Edge on 1.9 and 850. And since we have roaming agreements with the large carriers, we're able to offer that service nationwide. But with the rates that we get, and I'm sure that's another topic here, for roaming data, you can't allow that to happen very often. But we are fully mobile, and like I said, we just got the iPads in and are able to do that, and we're really excited about being able to offer that service to our customers.
Gotcha. Now, Rick, I guess maybe at the event, the RCA event, was there a lot of talk amongst the smaller carriers? Did you have some conversations with some that were perhaps looking, for some advice, I guess, on kind of moving to LTE and working with that different technology?
I didn't get approached by a lot of folks they're interested in that. Our experience has been really good. I've been impressed with the 700 megahertz spectrum and the throughput that we're getting. We've got 5 up, 5 down with 700 in the C block. And, man, the throughputs that we've been seeing are close to 50 meg on the downlink. We've had customers as far away as 16 miles from the tower that are getting 2 meg. We've got an employee that's 14 miles away that's getting 4 meg on the downlink. So we've been just really impressed with the ability of the 700 to propagate, and then the throughputs that we've been getting on it. And we've got some talented IT guys, but it has worked quite well. You run into some of the normal IP things that that you have, but for the most part, it's worked very well.
Good to hear. And then, of course, we won't dig into the whole WiMAX versus LTE thing with you, but maybe for Steve, I guess. Some of your members at the event. I guess what is the consensus from them, or what from your talking to them about their 4G plans? I mean, are a lot of them excited to do it, or just kind of waiting for things to kind of maybe settle down a bit when it comes to the standard, or what's I guess the general view from your members when it comes to moving to 4G and into LTE deployment?
Well, yes, I think everyone's excited about the possibilities of doing that, and as Rick said, the propagation values and the characteristics of the 700 megahertz is really outstanding, especially since you can build out a 4G LTE 700 megahertz system for probably 2/3 less cost than a 1.6 or 2.3 or 2.5 because of the carry. I mean, Rick, that's pretty unbelievable that you're getting those type of distances off the 700 megahertz. And so in rural America, it is really exciting that you could do that. It can continue to have the problem, though, is what is the ecosystem that allows you to not only provide a device and a handset, but also allows you a roaming partner with fair, equitable, or at least sustainable, economically sustainable rates in the long run. And that's again, that's a function where I think the FCC has to step in, and hopefully we'll be successful in ensuring the appeal of the data roaming order, which Verizon, as you know, appealed the FCC's data roaming order, which in my mind, an effective data roaming requirement is absolutely critical to every competitive carrier, and we have to be successful on that if we're going to find roaming partners out there, with at least the big two. So, there's a lot of promise. It's just that every day you get up and wonder if somebody else is putting a new impediment or a new challenge up to your efforts to build out.
Yeah, definitely. I know. I think our next topic we'll be looking at some of the regulatory issues there as well. But maybe from Martha too. Again, from attending the event there, I guess what was your general view of kind of the 4G movement by some of the smaller carriers? Did it seem like there was some excitement there? Were people getting pretty involved in it? Was there a lot of talk about kind of that, I guess, that next step was all these small guys to move to 4G?
Yes, I think that there's really more focus on the opportunity than the challenge. Of course, the challenge is very much there and very much in everyone's mind. But I think that focusing on the positive was the theme. And, a lot of these carriers are getting excited about the additional services that they will be able to offer with 4G and additional ways to monetize their customers, and then also just getting excited about what it's going to mean for their customers who've really never experienced that type of mobile broadband before. It's really more significant to the rural customers, I think, than it has been to some of the urban ones. So I think that the competitive carriers really reflect that excitement, and I think that most of them are definitely on board to make the investments that they need to make.
Yeah, makes sense. So great. Well, our next topic here.
If this is Rick, if I could just add one thing to that, there is a lot of interest in hosted switching, and we actually are providing hosted LTE switching for 3 different small rural carriers, and I think that LTE kind of lends itself to hosted applications, and there's a lot of folks that are doing that, but there's a lot of interest in it as well. So
yeah, and I think that's one of our topics coming up as well. I think so. We'll dig a little more into that, but again, I want to remind those listening in that if you do have some questions, we're going to try to save about the last 15 minutes or so to get to your questions. There's a question box there on the GoToWebinar control panel that you can send in those questions. I know we've got a few in already, and we will get to those here a little bit later on. But now I guess we'll move on to our next topic here, which is the regulatory environment. I know this is one, Steve, that RCA is very in-depth in dealing with. I know you guys have done a lot on this front, and it seems like you were saying, kind of every day seems like something else popping up to maybe throw a different hurdle in front of you. But I guess what's the general view coming out of the RCA event in Orlando on kind of how the regulatory environment is shaping up right now.
Well, yeah, it's challenging to say the least. I noticed you had legislative issues. I mean, the spectrum auctions. We were successful in, and I think ensuring that the legislative language that was in the payroll tax bill earlier this year ensured the opportunity for smaller carriers to get at least a chance to bid on the spectrum that's going to be coming available after the repacking of the broadcasters and 700 down to probably 500 megahertz. So, it was good to I think have a win so that the smaller carriers can at least know that they'll have a chance to bid, and it won't on slices of spectrum that RSAs, smaller bytes of spectrum that they can integrate into their network. So that was a plus. Now the difficult part is what do you do going forward at the FCC to create these auctions that we can bid on? And we like we said, the AT&T Qualcomm deal was approved earlier this year, and there we addressed this issue of the need for interoperability, and we did get an NPRM out just last month, a notice of proposed rulemaking, and the goal, hopefully, the goal will be to find interoperable solutions for the lower half of 700 megahertz, the band plan that we say band 12. AT&T has a band 17. If we can collapse those in the spectrum world, that means you've created an ecosystem that not only Rick and many of our other carriers will have devices, but also an ecosystem where you have potential roaming partners. So, I mean, that's key for us, and we're following that very closely. I know that you have USF down here. Man, that one's a very difficult. That's very difficult for wireless carriers, and I know that many of our carriers are owned by small RLACs or cooperatives, and I try to make this point that we represent wireless carriers here. There's 3 other organizations, 4 if you count some USTA, that represent RLACs and ILACs. And our concern about USF is everyone says we need mobile, high-speed broadband in rural America. The problem is, it's a great statement, but the problem is the policies don't always support that. And if you look at USF, RLECs got a 6% cut, the rural LECs. Mobile wireless guys got a 60% cut over 5 years, and ILECs got a 60% increase, wireline. And I'm just saying that consumers are voting with their preferences by going mobile. And in rural America, we did a study here at RCA showing that out of the 14 states that have less than 90% broadband penetration, 117,000 jobs would be created in rural America alone if we were to get mobile broadband. I would hope and think that as we go forward on this further notice of rulemaking at the FCC, that we can provide more funds to support wireless mobile broadband build-out rather than fixed wireless. I mean, rather than fixed landlines. I think we deserve a little more consideration in the policy side, and that's what we've been working for. So, I mean, those are the 2 big policy issues that I'll address any of the others that people may have, but those are 2 of the ones that you had on your list here.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess, maybe have Rick, if you want to maybe give some comment too. I mean, I know the regulatory environment is a big issue, and maybe from your point of view, are you seeing any progress, or how are you seeing kind of the regulatory environment shaping up from a rural carrier's point of view?
Actually, I'm going to say this like I feel. It's a disaster. I think what the FCC's focus, what they claim their focus was, is not going to happen, which is to expand the availability of broadband in rural areas. I agree with what Steve said about rural wireless providers, but I look at them, wireless providers and wireline providers, as complementary and not competitive. The big winners in what happened at the FCC is Verizon and AT&T and the larger LECs. Our CLEC, our competitive carrier, is getting stung both from an inter-carrier compensation and USF spot because it's all going to zero. Our wireless carrier, or USF, is going to zero. And our ILEC is losing a tremendous amount of support out of USF. And the amount of money that is being removed from all of those competitive carriers, both the wireline and wireless, is going to AT&T and Verizon and the price cap carriers. So while I agree with a lot of what Steve says, a lot of the small incumbent LECs are seeing a significant reduction in the amount of dollars that they receive out of USF, and when you look at it, the big winners are the price cap carriers and Verizon and AT&T.
Gotcha. And I don't know, Martha, if you had any questions or comments?
So Rick, with you describing this as a disaster, that sort of leads to a question for Steve about November. Do you see any possible positive changes, or what do you see?
Well, it really sort of depends on who wins the election. It's hard to see the USF changing significantly because of the election. USF is incredibly complicated, program to change. And I'm not disagreeing with Rick. I totally agree that rural America, whether it's wireline or wireless, got hosed by this particular so-called reform. But I wish I thought that the elections, no matter whether it's a Barack Obama or Mitt Romney, unfortunately I don't see either one of those changes impacting the desire of Congress to look at USF. In a meaningful way. I'm afraid that until the Congress starts seeing some, and Rick, I don't want the wireline guys to take this wrong, but until they start seeing some, companies, wireless and wireline companies, going out of business because they can't sustain this hope and promise that the broadband plan said, bring broadband to rural America. Until that happens, no one is, I don't see anybody on the horizon stepping up to the plate to help us out on USF.
I would agree with what you're saying, Steve. To me, it has to fail, which is going to take several years, and then somebody's going to have to change it, but they're going to have to see that it fails first. And unfortunately, that means rural customers without services. That means people filing for bankruptcy, companies filing for bankruptcy, and it failing. But that's going to take a couple of years for that to happen.
I hope that there's several opportunities that the FCC has to help reform existing USF policies. I mean, they have to address this imbalance they created by creating a huge increase in windfall to the ILECs, price cap carriers. I mean, Rick's right. It's going to the largest carriers. And that's not who's going to actually sink dollars in capital investment in rural America. So we may have some possibilities of improving that over the next 9 months or so with very aggressive actions down at the FCC. But right now I don't see something significant happening that changes this imbalance. I don't think reform was all that good of a reform to begin with.
Yeah, interesting. Well, we're getting a little low on time here, so I want to make sure we get in the rest of our topics as well. I'm going to call a bit of an audible here and skip number 4 for now and maybe come back to number 4. But I did want to kind of get to this one because I think Rick kind of touched on it a little bit, and so did Steve. What are kind of looking for the when it comes to rural operators, it does seem like there is some potential out there for partnerships, for for opportunities to partner with other companies. I know at the RCA event this year, you guys had some speakers, a good lineup of speakers. One of them again was Light Squared, interesting enough, who is kind of trying to have its own battles, I guess, it's fighting with the FCC at this point. But maybe if we could get some comment, maybe even start with Martha on this one. Martha, if you kind of from the show, what was, I guess, the view when it came to how the smaller carriers were looking at perhaps some options outside of their, I guess, traditional rolling out their own services, whether it's a Clearwire or a Light Squared or someone else? Was there kind of a general view from the carriers at the show about that there are some different options out there for them if they're moving to 4G services?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's cooperation. I mean, we saw NetAmerica pooling the spectrum resources so that the actual rural operators could focus just on their network infrastructure investments. We see, Steve, with your buying alliance, I think that's helping some of the smaller carriers come together to try to get the devices when and if they are available, and I think the Associated Carrier Group is also working towards that. I think it really is a sense of coming together, and not just the smaller carriers. Sprint is part of it now, and T-Mobile as well. So I think that most of what I was hearing was that in order to compete, they do need to cooperate. Yeah,
interesting. I don't know, Rick, if you have some comment on that. I mean, I know I was at a show last year, and I think the COO from LEAP Wireless had kind of made a comment about perhaps everybody banding together to kind of form a strong number 3 operator, pulling spectrum and pulling resources together. I don't know, Rick, if you see that as an opportunity or kind of how you view these different opportunities and chances for partnership amongst some of the smaller operators out there.
Well, when you talk about operators our size, that's a big issue, and I think that there's more interest in it now than what there ever has been, especially from carriers that look like us, that look like Mosaic, from the simple fact that the message that they got from the FCC in late last year was, we don't really care if you're around anymore. So there's people looking at ways to reduce their costs and to offer other services. There's a lot of small carriers like Mosaic that have purchased spectrum but haven't had the reason or the desire to become an operator, and now that's becoming a lot more of an interesting proposition for them because of the message that came out of the FCC last fall. Fortunately, there's a lot of options for them out there.
Yeah, interesting. And I know, Steve. Now, I would say that RCA, I think, in the past, and even at the latest show here, has done a great job at getting different companies who have these different options for rural guys to come in and speak. I mean, obviously, one of the shows last year, you had even had Verizon Wireless there talking about its LTE in Rural America program, which I know you have some mixed feelings about the program in general. But you guys seem to have done a really good job of bringing in these options for people to at least hear their side of the story. What's, I guess, your general view on kind of these different partnerships that are out there for some of the smaller carriers?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think one of our jobs here at RCA is to make sure that our carriers know all the options that are available and bring experts from those companies to share their thoughts and insights, and that's why we did the roundtable session last time that not only included NetAmerica and Light Squared and Clearwire and several of these other options, and including Verizon LTE. And we continue to do that. One of the things we learned at this show was that the smaller tier ones now realize they have the same issues at stake as the tier 2s and 3s and 4s. And one of the things we're trying to do is, yes, win as many battles as we can on the Hill and at the FCC, because Rick's right. There was a lot of good talk, happy talk, but the actions didn't support it at the FCC. So one of the things I hope we're going to do is create opportunities for business relationships. Sprint has been very forthcoming. I think it was an announcement there at the show that they want to work with smaller carriers to create the concept of a 4G LTE roaming hub. We're actually meeting with them Any of our RCA carriers that want to participate in that, you sign an NDA. Talk to to us here. Brad Blanken's heading it up for us. Rick and other carriers his size. We intend to make sure that they have a voice at the business opportunities of 4G LTE, because this gives us a roaming capability. We're also thinking that T-Mobile might also make a good potential roaming partner. So on the business side, we're trying to connect the dots with the competitive carriers so that they realize that they have something to share. And then we're going to try to connect the dots on the policy side to make the FCC more aware that they need to make pro-competitive policy decisions in Washington, D.C. That's the only way that we're going to end up with more than 2 carriers in the United States.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I know we have quite a few questions that are coming in already too. Maybe I think we're down to about 14 minutes left for the call, so I want to make sure we get to some of those questions as well. I think one of the questions that came in was, and this might be maybe for Rick, because I think you guys are doing some of the work with this, but one of the questions is, does LTE radio options offer chances for easier RAN infrastructure sharing? Do you see any potential for increase in RAN sharing going forward?
I think it does, just from the standpoint that all of the backhaul and the other things that you're dealing with are, it's all IP based. It's not the building blocks of T1s and OC3s and all of the backhaul of the past. It scales real well. You can get bandwidth from one end of the country to the other at reasonable prices, pay for what you use. It scales really well as you add more cell sites and you add more customers. It really does make it much easier to host or to share radio access network equipment. To me, it's much easier than 3G was, put it that way.
Yeah, interesting. Another question here, and this one might be maybe for Steve. Do you see the planned Connect America Fund orders having any value in funding rural LTE deployments for some of the smaller carriers out there?
Well, I mean, yes, I'm hoping that Mobile One, the Mobility One, is basically one-shot funding with capital investments. Many of our carriers right now are going through a fairly complicated process of deciding what are the areas that they want to bid on to be that carrier that receives Mobility One out of the first batch of Mobility One funding, since it's basically capital. It doesn't include operational expenses. What we're trying to tell the FCC is, listen, you need to make sure that you adequately fund Mobility 2, because that has a real impact on whether our carriers want to participate in Mobility 1. Who wants to build a tower out into one of those very difficult, highly costly areas to operate in if you don't have the ability to sustain that investment and receive operational support in the Mobility 2? So we explained that thoroughly in the review and the comment process, even to the point that many of our carriers suggested that we don't want to participate in Mobile One if you're not including operational expenses. Well, the FCC didn't do what we asked, and so now we have a very difficult process of saying, do you take under Mobility One? I'm hoping that many of our carriers will find some opportunities to access that money, and also, if we're successful in the further notices, to provide a few more dollars in Mobility 2 that not only cover capital but OpEx, operational expenses. So yes, I hope that those funds will be utilized by the wireless carriers, but they haven't made it really easy to make those decisions.
Yeah, understand. And then I guess maybe one final question, and this is kind of, I guess, on today's or this morning's news. I know Stevie touched on it a bit earlier, but on the Verizon's announcement about potentially selling off some spectrum to what it seems like, at least, to perhaps grease the wheels on getting approval of the the spectrum code deals, if they come from the AWS spectrum. Maybe for Steve, I mean, what's, I guess, RCA's general view, or perhaps even your general view on this, and if it, if it does go through, it does seem like it could perhaps even open some spectrum availability for some of the smaller carriers out there. I guess what's your general view of kind of the announcement this morning?
Well, I guess three things real quick. We did a press release on it, and so you can go to our website and find that. But three things. One, the announcement clearly confirms what we've been saying for several months now, that Verizon has access to spectrum that they've not used in our warehousing, or they currently don't have any plans to deploy. So that's pretty clear. Two, they really want the spectrum code deal, and they want the AWS spectrum. The reason is because they will end up with 95% of the AWS spectrum, that flavor of AWS spectrum. That compared with their C block allows them almost a self-contained ecosystem, which is, by spectrum policies thwarts competitors. And three is that it is absolutely imperative now that the FCC creates an interoperable lower band 700 megahertz and collapses band 12 and 17 together. Otherwise, there will not be a place to sort of gather if you're a competitive carrier in the 4G LTE world for not only data, as Rick is, but data and voice. So we need that ecosystem. The FCC has it within their authority to create that, and now's the time to do it before they've balkanized the 700 and the AWS between Verizon and AT&T. So those are my thoughts on why Verizon has made it such a high priority to get the AWS spectrum in the spectrum code deal. This is proof positive that they're willing to go to almost any lengths in order to get it.
Interesting, interesting. I don't know, Rick, if you had a chance to see the announcement, or if you had any comment on the announcement this morning. Obviously, you guys work in the 700 megahertz space, so I guess it could pertain to you to an extent. But I don't know if you had any sort of a comment on that.
Yeah, it was very interesting. Unfortunately, in the 700 megahertz is very valuable spectrum.
Yeah.
In the past, these deals have went down to where they end up selling them to large carriers. It's like they want to just sell off the whole thing in a block, and it's very difficult for a small carrier to get the attention of Verizon or any large carrier when it comes to a spectrum deal, because they're not interested in buying 5 states. They're interested in buying 5 counties. And my concern is the same. Steve voiced it very well, and that is one company owning a tremendous amount of AWS spectrum. I question their need for that AWS spectrum in many, many areas. Verizon has a tremendous amount of AWS spectrum already that they're not using at all, zero amounts. And, to me, it almost, someone could make the argument that they're trying to keep it away from T-Mobile so that they can't launch LTE on it. But, I would never accuse anybody of doing that.
Of course not, of course. And luckily no one's listening in on this, so I think you're okay on that. But anyway, well, again, I think we're down to about 5 minutes or so for the webinar here. I know we skipped one of our topics here, which is on the competitive challenges. Maybe Rick, if you maybe for a couple minutes here, if you can, I guess, maybe provide some insight into kind of what it's like out there right now for a rural carrier in this market. I mean, some of the challenges you're seeing, being not just against the bigger guys, but also some of your peers in some markets. What's I guess your general view of kind of the market right now?
I think the hardest thing for us, we've got very good devices. We've got top-of-the-line 3G devices. I think we're moving into probably getting some LTE devices. We're going to have to go IMS in order to make that happen. But I think from a device standpoint that we're very competitive. Coverage, we're very competitive. One of the things that we see the most difficult is marketing challenges. Mm-hmm. Today's under 30 people don't read newspapers. They don't listen to the radio. Their way of looking at media is totally different, and it's difficult to get in front of those people. the large carriers can, use broadcast TV. Kids still watch that. But for us, it's such an expensive option, route to go, and we only have a sliver of the market that they cover. So our dollars don't get used very well. So to me, we've explored a lot of different areas with marketing, and we have some youth events, and we do a lot of advertising on Facebook and on the internet, and we try to do things to get in front of the kids with the things that they're using. But that's a real challenge for us, I think, and it's a challenge for any small provider because, we're in the Minneapolis MTA, and so we get Minneapolis, Minnesota news, and if we're going to advertise on that, there's 8 million people watching that thing, and we only cover a sliver in Northwest Wisconsin.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
let me, in that regard, one of the things we're trying to also do here at RCA is help our carriers roll out programs and capabilities that the larger carriers have, that the smaller carriers have a very costly, more difficult time in getting access to. Rick has done some really great things on what I call ultra local, and getting the attention of the 18 to 25-year-olds through a whole series of local networking opportunities that they uniquely devised. What we're trying to do is make sure that we have we create an app store that can be your own, the carrier's own app store. We build a platform and the capability, invite all of our members that provide apps to give us apps, and then the carrier can have their own skin on that thing that says, hey, this is Mosaic Wireless App Store. We're trying to bring some of those capabilities, loyalty program, this roaming hub concept, so that our smaller carriers can get faster to market with some of these innovative issues that make the difference in competing in the market. So, we're trying to not only be the policy advocate, but we're also trying, when the carrier says we need some help in a certain area of competing, we want to try to help find solutions for them. So that's why I think if you're a competitive carrier, it's worth your while to check us out and come to our events and join the debate.
One other thing I would add to that, and that's the iPhone. That brings a look and feel and along with just selling it to people, the ability to have it and be able to advertise it, and that your network is capable of doing that, puts you in a league of your network being a first-rate network, even if the customer isn't interested in an iPhone.
Yeah.
So not having that we've had a lot of feedback from our sales associates that's one thing that people come in, and when they find out we don't have an iPhone, they turn around and walk out, and that's difficult.
Yeah. I mean, I hate to see that one device kind of has such an impact, but that does seem to be the case right now when it comes to that device, and it does. For the past couple of weeks, there's been some announcements about it rolling out to some of the smaller carriers, which is obviously a good thing, and hopefully that continues. I know there's some issues with which spectrum those devices support, but hopefully that's something that can kind of be worked out, and in the next iteration of the device allow for more and more rollouts of that device to all the carriers out there. So.
But Rick, what about the new iPad? Does that replace some of that for consumers, at least in terms of showing that you are at the forefront? And
we sure hope that does. We're if all of our tests work and the thing works as advertised, we'll make sure that the youth that we're working with, that the youth have those, and that they've got Mosaic information on it, so that when they go to high school, they show all their friends that they've got the iPad from Mosaic, and our employees and that kind of stuff will have them in their hands, so that we're able to use that leverage as much as we can. But yeah, I'm really excited about that, and that helping in that way.
Yeah, great topic there, Martha. Thanks for bringing that in too as well. Oh, well, it looks like we're just about out of time here. Again, I want to thank everyone for joining us on the call today. For those of you looking for some more insight, I'd like to highlight a few special reports that we've released here recently from RCR Wireless News here, and you can check those out on our website. And also, I want to thank our sponsors for today's webinar, Enritsu and Alcatel-Lucent. Thanks for sponsoring these webinars that we're doing. And also, I just want to thank you again, everyone, for participating today, and a special thanks to Steve from RCA, to Rick from Mosaic, and Martha for providing the insights. Thanks a lot, everyone, for participating. I definitely appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank
again,
you all.
All right, and again, if people have any additional questions, feel free to shoot some emails off to myself, Dan Meyer at RCR Wireless News. My email address is dmeyer@rcrwireless.com. Thanks a lot, everyone.